All right, here we go with section 3, and here's your focus question. Progressivism was a worldwide movement. In the early 20th century, cities around the world experienced similar problems caused by industrialization and massive growth. In 1850, only two cities, London and Paris, had a population of more than a million. By 1900, there were 12 in Europe and the US, New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia. Reformers around the world exchanged ideas and proposed new social policies. As Britain, France, and Germany created old age pensions, minimum wage laws, and unemployment insurance, and regulated workplace safety, American reformers started to advocate such social legislation, meaning governmental action to address urban problems and the insecurities of working class life. Progressives thought modern society required basic changes in the functions of political authority, whether to check the power of corporations, protect consumers, civilize market relations, or guarantee industrial freedom in the workplace. Influenced by Gilded Age and European reforms, progressives sought to renew notions of an activist, socially conscious government. They rejected old assumptions that powerful government threatened liberty. They saw freedom as a positive, not a negative concept in which freedom represented the power of the government to intervene in public and private life to improve society. John Dewey was one of the foremost proponents of a school of philosophy called pragmatism, which insisted that institutions and social policies must be judged by their concrete effects, not their longevity or how well they comport with religious doctrine or traditional political beliefs. Experience, pragmatists insisted, was more important than doctrine. Some saw pragmatism as a way of using evidence to moderate conflicts between religion and science. For others, the outlook encouraged an experimental approach to social problems characteristic of progressivism. Dewey was a founder of the New School for Social Research in New York City, which stressed the importance of scientifically evaluating public policy. The idea that with proper information, social improvement could be achieved was widely shared among American progressives, as well as their counterparts in other countries. In America, with a decentralized federal system of government, most progressive reforms were enacted at the state and local levels. In cities, progressives worked to reform the structure of government to reduce the power of political bosses, establish public control of natural monopolies such as gas and waterworks, and improve public transportation. They raised property taxes in order to spend more money on schools, parks, and other public facilities. Gilded Age mayors Hazen Pingree and Samuel Golden Rule Jones pioneered urban progressivism. Pingree battled the business interests that had dominated city government, forced gas and telephone companies to lower their rates, and established a municipal power plant. Jones instituted an 8-hour day and paid vacations at his factory that produced oil drilling equipment. As mayor of Toledo, Ohio, he founded night schools and free kindergartens, built new parks, and supported the right of workers to unionize. Since state legislatures defined the powers of city government, urban progressives often carried their campaigns to the state level. Pingree became governor of Michigan in 1896, in which post he continued his battle against railroads and other corporate interests. Although often associated with eastern cities, progressivism was also a major presence in the West. Former populists and those who believed in the moral power of the frontier were attracted to regulation of railroads and other corporations, and the promise of direct democracy. Important populists in the West were Hiram Johnson of California and Robert La Follette of Wisconsin. Oregon stood at the forefront of progressive reform. Progressives established the Oregon system, which included direct legislature, direct primaries, initiative, referendum, and the recall. Women gained suffrage in the state. The Oregon system was supported by middle-class reformers and reform-minded workers and farmers. Other states adopted the Oregon system. In California, progressives dismantled the power of the Southern Pacific Railroad. In Wisconsin, Robert La Follette made the state a laboratory for democracy, instituting a series of reforms called the Wisconsin Idea, which included primary elections, taxation of corporate wealth, and state regulation of utilities. Wisconsin offered the most striking merger of the social and political impulses that went under the name of progressivism. Progressives wanted to restore democracy by returning political power to citizens and civic harmony to a divided America. Afraid of violent class conflict and corporate power, they thought political reforms would help create a unified people, devoted to greater democracy and social reconciliation. But increasing government power made it more necessary to determine who should be able to participate in politics. Progressive political reforms were often contradictory. The electorate was expanded and contracted, empowered and removed from influencing government. Democracy was expanded by the 17th Amendment, which made U.S. senators elected by popular vote rather than by state legislatures, by adoption of popular election of judges, and by primary elections among party members to select candidates. Several states adopted the initiative, where voters propose legislation, the referendum, where voters directly vote on a proposal, and recall, where voters remove officials. The era ended with suffrage for women, the largest democratic expansion in American history. But some progressive reforms also restricted democracy, notably the disenfranchisement of blacks in the South. Many localities replaced elected mayors with appointed nonpartisan commissions or city managers, removing local government from the control of political machines, but also popular control. New literacy tests and residency and registration requirements limited the right to vote among poor and migrants. Progressive electoral reforms marked a retreat from the notion that voting was an inherent right of American citizenship. Most progressives were leery of the real world of politics, in which people pursued narrow class, ethnic, or regional interests. Many progressives thus turned to college professors and other professional experts, believing government could ensure intelligent rule over society through a democracy run by impartial experts unaccountable to citizens. This was part of progressives' impulse toward order, efficiency, and centralized management as a means of ensuring social justice. In Drift and Mastery, Walter Lippmann argued the nation could either continue to drift, operating according to a dated belief in individual autonomy, or embrace mastery, using scientific inquiry to address modern social problems. For Lippmann and others, political freedom rested not in direct political participation, but in the formation of public policy by the most qualified. But progressivism also contained a more democratic vision of an activist government, perhaps best expressed by women reformers. Still unable to vote and hold office in most states, women were central to progressive politics. They challenged barriers to political participation and elaborated a democratic, grassroots vision of government. They were moved to act most often by the condition faced by poor immigrant communities and women and child workers. The era's most prominent female reformer was Jane Addams. Addams never married and resisted expectations to become tied to a family as a mother and wife, and instead, in 1889, founded Hull House in Chicago, a settlement house dedicated to improving the lives of the immigrant poor. Settlement house workers moved into poor neighborhoods, built and ran schools, employment bureaus, and health clinics, and helped women victims of domestic abuse. By 1910, more than 400 settlement houses had been established in cities around the nation. Addams typified the era's new woman, as an increasing number of women went to college and entered professions such as social services, nursing, and education. Middle-class women's efforts to help the poor, working women, and children helped expand government's role in society. Through settlement and other social work, these women learned that legislation was necessary for dealing with housing, income, and health inequalities. Hull House led a number of campaigns for legislation in Illinois around shorter working hours, workplace safety, and union organizing rights, which inspired others to do likewise. In the South, however, race-affected reform, as ending child labor, was justified as necessary for giving white children the education they would need as members of the South's ruling race. The settlement houses have been called spearheads of reform as they produced prominent progressive leaders, such as Florence Kelley, who organized the National Consumers League to use purchasing power as a way to force manufacturers to improve working conditions. After 1900, the campaign for women's suffrage became a mass movement for the first time. The National American Women's Suffrage Association's membership grew from 13,000 in 1893 to more than 2 million by 1917, and its campaigns had some success in states, half of which allowed women to vote in local elections regarding schools. It won women's suffrage in Wyoming, Colorado, Idaho, and Utah. The West also led the way in women holding public office. Between 1910 and 1914, 7 more Western states gave women the vote. These campaigns were conducted with a new spirit of militancy and used modern methods of advertising, publicity, and entertainment characteristic of a mass consumer society. But state campaigns were costly, and increasingly efforts focused on gaining suffrage at the national level. The celebration of women's domestic role actually inspired the suffrage movement. Many progressive proposals emerged from the idea that the state should protect women and children, and female reformers formed a movement for improving the lives of poor mothers and children. Many states enacted pensions for mothers to enable them to care for children. Such maternalist reforms were based on the assumption that government should encourage women's ability to bear and raise children and allow them to be economically independent. Other progressive legislation recognized that women worked outside the home, but defined them as a dependent group, like children, that needed state protection in ways that male workers were not. In the landmark case Muller versus Oregon in 1908, the U.S. Supreme Court accepted the arguments of Louis Brandeis that long hours of labor were dangerous for women whose childbearing abilities required government protection. This was the first major breach of liberty of contract doctrine just 3 years after the Lochner decision, which invalidated a New York law limiting the working hours of male bakers. But the costs of Mueller were high, as while even more states passed protective laws for women workers, these laws both benefited women and tied them to their family roles and kept reinforced gender discrimination and exclusion in labor markets. Though the use of government to regulate working conditions raised questions about liberty of contract, maternalist policies built gender inequality into the foundations of the welfare state. Some progressives, like Brandeis, envisioned a welfare state that was rooted in the notion of universal economic entitlements, including the right to a decent income and protection against unemployment and work-related accidents. This vision enjoyed considerable support in the progressive era, and by 1913, 22 states had enacted workmen's compensation laws to benefit both male and female workers. This legislation wedged open the door for broader programs of social insurance. So that was the third section. We'll be back with the fourth.